Bienvenidos, Fright fans! Once more, Jaime En Fuego here for more installments of Tales from the Crypt coverage for Enfuegotainment for the month of October, where I am basically covering 3 episodes a day, the BUENO, the MALO, and the FEO of the entirety of HBO's beloved anthology horror series run. And so, basically been giving a designation to each of these 3 episodes as I watch one each day. 93 episodes, 31 days in the month of October. It's worked out perfectly, but I have found myself, as the series has improved in quality, we're nearing the end of the 3rd season here, I've really found myself struggling to give these distinctions, you know? It's been nerve-wracking, especially when you like pretty much all of the episodes that you watch in one particular day. So I'm gonna do my best here, but let's just get right into the BUENO and see how things go. So, first off, this episode is called Izel Kill. That's right, and it is an episode originally in the pages of the Vault of Horror number 31, which was the same as Tales from the Crypt and Haunt of Fear and Shock Suspense stories. They were all under the EC umbrella, which was basically run at the time by Mr. William H. Gaines. And yeah, amazing guy, so revolutionary in the comic industry as far as just producing mature content that wasn't necessarily meant for kids, but eventually adapted his Tales from the Crypt to the small screen for HBO. Yeah, it was watched by kids like me back in the day, but this is one that I most definitely did see and I liked as a kid, and it's also held up incredibly well. Scripted by a guy named Larry Wilson, and he had some screenwriting work for both Beetlejuice and for the Addams Family. He was a co-writer for both of those, which were very, very dark and had kind of a gothic sense of humor to them at times. This episode, however, it's one of those Tales from the Crypts that really does not have any humor, and that's one of its staples, you know, is the fact that there was always that little, you know, like black humor underlining, kind of easing the tension. It was almost like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down type thing. I don't know, but this is one that is pretty much devoid of it. You have an incredible turn by Mr. Tim Roth, who is just he's a world-class thespian. I mean, you've seen him in so many things from, you know, Tarantino films like Pulp Fiction and the upcoming Hateful Eight, and, you know, the list just goes on and on and on. The guy's a tremendous actor, even when he's in bad films like that Tim Burton Planet of the Apes remake. I actually thought his performance as the main ape, the baddie, was actually one of the shining lights in that film, despite it being not so good. Biggest name to mention here for this particular episode is Mr. John Harrison, and John Harrison was a Pittsburgh protege of George Romero, who I had the pleasure to interview this year for the Horror Show channel, so check that out. It was at Scarefest in Kentucky. It was a humbling experience to talk to pretty much the zombie master and the one who popularized it. And so Harrison, he got acquainted with Mr. Romero, and he worked helping compose some soundtrack work. He also worked as first assistant director on, I believe it was Day of the Dead and a couple other films, but yeah, he composed the score for Creepshow and for Day of the Dead, and then he went on to help Romero develop the Tales from the Dark Side television show, which everybody knows was inspired by those EC comics that were eventually adapted here for Tales from the Crypt. They weren't adapting EC stories though. These are all original ones, just in the spirit of it, similar to what Creepshow was. So Harrison actually wrote, composed the score for, and directed a bunch of Tales from the Dark Side episodes, and so because of that, he was actually tapped to do Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, to direct that, which is also considered by many to be the 3rd Creepshow, even though it didn't really have that title to it. And so Creepshow, Tales from the Crypt, all these different anthology horror shows, they have a ton in common, and this Izel Kill is definitely one of the absolute best that you will see possibly in the entire Tales from the Crypt run, because Tim Roth is this artist who he's got a drinking problem, he's in and out of therapy, but he's broke and he's trying to find some inspiration, and he ends up finding it in an unexpected place where somebody dies in his building, and he goes and he takes a few photographs of it, and it in turn becomes the morbid inspiration that this collector that he's acquainted with just sees so much amazing potential in. This guy collects like violent, crazy work, and this painting that Roth does based on those photographs of this guy who, you know, finds an untimely fate in his apartment complex, it just really, you know, this is going to spiral out of control and turn into something bad. So Roth is acquainted with a girl from therapy. There's all kinds of you know, interwoven type stuff, and it's a downward spiral as, you know, he kind of falls back into some crazy behaviors and whatnot. It's a non-spoiler review here, so I can't mention much beyond that, but it is possibly in the top 3 or 5 of this entire season, if not in the top 10 of the entire run of Tales from the Crypt. However, I still have a lot of episodes to go through, so that's a bold statement perhaps right at the moment, but Tim Roth is a revelation in this. He is just as brooding and amazing as we've seen him in various roles. So yes, this is definitely hands down my Bueno episode. So let's jump into the MALO now. And this one is called Undertaking Palor. Yeah, that's right. And it was actually from Tales from the Crypt. Yep, that's right. Book 38. Yeah, that's right. And the funny thing is you've got this guy John Glover as the Undertaker, and he is, yeah, you guessed it, a corrupt Undertaker. And once again, this is another episode that's not that bad. I just really had to choose the missing link. It's funny though, because I remembered really liking this one a lot as a kid, because it's another one that I saw when I was a lot younger. I was like maybe 12 or 13 or something like that. But the reason I liked it is because there's a bunch of kids, and these kids are basically amateur horror filmmakers. They've all got cameras, and you've got the kid who played Short Round, and you've also got Jason Marsden, he was in Erie, Indiana. Who remembers that show on Fox? That was an awesome show. Mr. Joe Dante helped develop that one, and he was also in like Full House and Step by Step and a bunch of other crappy 90s like TJIF sitcoms. But yeah, you've got all these familiar faces, these young kids from, you know, the early to mid 90s, and they're all these amateur filmmakers, and they want to break into the mortuary so they can maybe see a dead body and, you know, get all freaked out. And what kid didn't want to do that, who liked scary stuff? And they see John Glover, who played the villain, and he's done so many villainous turns that were memorable, but at least the ones that stick out for me is probably Gremlins 2: The New Batch, and yeah, maybe as Lex Luthor's dad in Smallville. That was a pretty iconic one for him too. But so yeah, they realize pretty quickly the corruption that's going on. There's some affiliations with a pharmacist in the city, or in the town I should say, because this is definitely more like suburban small town. It's got a very kind of Stephen King type vibe at times. You know, it's almost like a Poor Man's Stand By Me in some ways, but you know, if they actually found some more corrupt people behind that body that all those kids were searching for. So once again, not an absolute MALO, just okay, but definitely worth watching, especially for the sheer fact that the performances by all the kids are really good. It's kind of funny seeing Short Round, and you know, he was also in the Goonies. Boy, I'm trying to remember his name right at the moment. Jonathan Kekwan, I believe. Yes, Jonathan Kekwan. And yeah, Jonathan Kekwan, seeing him all grown up is kind of a trip, and you know, the other two kids were of note as well. But yeah, it's not bad. It just doesn't live up to, I mean, after watching an episode like the aforementioned performance of Tim Roth, this is just kind of, it's a little bit more fluff, and you know, afterwards. So yeah, let's finally go to the feo. That's right, the ugly. We've done the good, we've done the bad, and now we have to come to the ugly. And this is ugly for the sheer fact that it is a good episode that I did not appreciate as a kid, because it was not what I wanted it to be. It appeared in the pages of The Vault of Horror number 20, and it's called The Reluctant Vampire, and it stars one of the best actors possibly ever, Mr. Malcolm McDowell. And you know, the roles that I always think of for him, I mean, smaller stuff, well, not smaller stuff, but lesser known things, I guess, like Time After Time and Star Trek Generations. And I mean, he has had an acting career that has lasted like, I want to say over 4 decades at this point, you know, 4+ decades. But who can really forget him from A Clockwork Orange, or even as the crazy, you know, Roman leader in Caligula, that crazy Penthouse produced movie that had, you know, crazy sex and violence, and you know, but just this amazing performance by Mr. McDowell. So he's a vampire, but he's, as the title implies, a reluctant vampire. He doesn't necessarily want to hurt people, you know, he's kind of a nice guy. And he works at a blood bank, so he can get all of his blood for free, and he doesn't have to hurt anybody. But people are kind of getting wind of what's going on, and there is a descendant of Van Helsing who's like getting on the radio and saying he knows there's a vampire out on the loose. And yeah, it's an interesting concept. The bad guy, ironically enough, ends up being that Mr. George Wendt, who everybody knows as Norm, yeah, from Cheers. And so he's the leader, or not the leader, I guess he's the director or the head of this blood bank where Malcolm McDowell works at, and he knows something's going on, but he's not quite sure what it is. He knows blood is going missing. There's kind of a haughty secretary who likes the reluctant vampire. And so the feo here is the fact that this is a good episode with a great performance from everybody involved. It was directed by Elliot Silverstein, who was an OG director of the first Twilight Zone back in the 60s, and a close protege of the William Gaines. You know, Bill Gaines, the guy who, you know, helped change the entire culture of EC Comics after taking it over from his father and, you know, launching Tales from the Crypt. And you know, all those other aforementioned magazines. And so, yeah, the ugly once again is the fact that I didn't appreciate this properly as a kid. I wanted more buckets of blood and craziness, and there's some interesting twists and turns. It keeps it interesting, it keeps it exciting. So yeah, this is me going in a different direction with the Feo. So yeah, it was ugly that I didn't really, I just was too young to see how great it actually was. So I'm going to end on that note, guys. This great series that I am still going through here on the 11th day. This has been part 11 of my Tales from the Crypt coverage, and there's only a few episodes left here in the 3rd season. I cannot wait to start the 4th, and I cannot wait to talk more of these episodes with you guys in the coming days of October. I've been Jaime En Fuego. You can find me on all social media just at Jaime En Fuego, as you're seeing it spelled below. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I always keep it fresh. I'm always talking cinema and musica and just all things of the arts, because they enrich our lives so much. So until you see me mañana discussing more Tales from the Crypt, adios amigos.